had mentioned earlier in the service that Isaac, in particular, Isaac and Rebekah, in the beginning of this week's Torah portion, are in many ways a role model, according to Jewish tradition, for prayer. What does that mean, and why would we need such a role model? I happen to think we need one, but after all, I'm in the prayer business. That prayer is something that I and that our community and our cantor and all of us are committed to, and yet, let's be honest with ourselves. In a world where so many consequential things are happening, in a world where in the last 6-7 weeks, so much feels like and has changed, how do you feel when you hear the words thoughts and prayers? Not so good. At least speaking for myself. It seems to be a euphemism for I'm going to say this but not do anything. That really is what that phrase has come to mean. Whereas prayer, while it is supposed to be many different things in our tradition, is not supposed to be a substitution for action, but rather a preparation for it. Actions don't come from nowhere. For us to act, for us to get involved, for us to do something, for us to expect others, especially those who've taken positions of responsibility and leadership to do something, before they act, they need that sense of motivation, that real willingness to be moved in order to act. And we can see that, especially not just in the words themselves, but in the traditional understanding of what happens at the beginning of our Torah portion this morning. At the beginning of our Torah portion this morning, as happens consistently throughout human history and recorded in the early generations of our people, Isaac and Rebekah spend, in the traditional understanding, decades hoping and trying to have a child, and find themselves with challenges, find themselves barren, a painful traditional word for fertility difficulties, unwilling to do so. And it's not mine in any way today ever to lessen that kind of a pain that individuals or couples today or those in ancient times would have experienced when they have this difficulty. In fact, the reality that in each generation and in so many other stories of our tradition, this hope for the future that seems to be dashed as something that ought to be better and yet is not merely a real and personal challenge for the individual or individuals facing it, but is symbolic. It is symbolic for our hopes, for what should be, for our efforts to create a future that we cannot bring forth magically or mystically, and that we cannot control. Such is the reality. And in that context, in the third verse of this morning's parashah, Parashat Toldot, which means generations, it says Isaac prayed to God, but the wording is very specific. It says, "V'yetar Yitzchak l'Adonai lenochach ishto ki akarahi v'ye'ater lo Adonai v'tar Rivka ishto." The translation merely says that Isaac not prayed, but pleaded for God, literally opposite his wife. And it says, ki akara he, that she was barren. It's pointed out by our tradition, though, that the word he, meaning she, is written as if it were who? Him. He, Vav, Aleph. And while this is a common writing and reading in our tradition, in this place, the tradition places Isaac in a very specific way here. It says that that means that what she was going through, of course, belonged to her, but was real to him. That wherever he was, her pain, her difficulty, and his were present to him. And where did he go to pray this prayer of his, hoping for a better future? Says the traditional commentator, he returned to Har HaMoriah. He returned to the place where he was bound by his father, and there offered this prayer. Can you imagine returning to a place of undoubtedly great trauma for him, returning to a place that symbolized what could have been lost, what might not have been, of the reality of the tenuous nature of life each and every moment. And there, with a full sense of his own pain and that of his wife, Rebecca, there he offered that prayer. And at that moment, that God responded. The Hasidic commentary makes the strangest, but I actually like it, the strangest connection for what that verb means, v'yeter. We said that hopes and prayers, we don't always think of hopes and prayers as something significant in the world today when they're said that way. The root of the word for pleading and for God responded, ayin tav resh, is a medieval word for, of all things, a pitchfork. That's what an atar is. It is a pitchfork. Well, why would they point that out at all? Well, what is the purpose of a pitchfork? It breaks open the ground to make something possible and literally turns it over, turns it upside down, so that you can see what's underneath that you might not otherwise see. And prayer that is meaningful, prayer that affects our motivation, the prayer that actually leads to action, I think has to be much less a page in a siddur and much more a pitchfork, much more a willingness to open up the reality around us and to see it. I guess maybe that's why, being honest with you, 5 or 6 days a week, I lead our online service, Boker Tov. And each of those days, since shortly after October the 7th, once they were available to us, we show a 1 to 3 minute video of one of the families of the captives talking about their loss. I don't know how many of you have actually seen those videos, either with us on Boker Tov or elsewhere. It is a painful experience. I've discussed it with others. It is, in a way, it is more difficult to pray these days as a Jewish person than it has been other times if we actually open ourselves to what's going on in the world around us. This chair next to me here is not just a chair. It's a reminder of the current pain and the potential loss of so many families from 30 different nations throughout the world, even though the vast majority of them are Israeli. And why is it that the world seems, frankly, to care less? Seems at best, at certain moments, to offer some kind of thoughts and prayers. instead of acknowledging that, frankly, it's like being hit over the head with something heavy to be aware each and every moment, or at any moment whatsoever, about the genuine pain and loss of these tortured families. And really, I mean, it upsets me to have to face it for 1 to 3 minutes a day. How do you face that for 24 hours a day? And yet they do. And what is the response of the world around us? The response is to mention them occasionally, and then more and more to suggest that Israel should accept a ceasefire. Where are the cries for the immediate and unconditional return of all of the hostages and the immediate unconditional surrender of Hamas? The world that we live in, it recognizes in word that no peace nor better situation is possible for Israel, the Palestinians, whose suffering is as real as anyone's suffering. No better future is possible with a terrorist organization dedicated only to death and suffering and struggle. A better future for no one is possible with this organization. And then what is the response? To leave Israel to do the horrific, dirty work of rooting out Hamas and then blame Israel for how she does it. That's what's happening. Why? Because they're unwilling to look at the reality, just as they are unwilling to accept responsibility for where words lead. It's true that prayers and thoughts will not necessarily bring people home, but we've seen that words do have consequences. We've seen that. There is no separation between being a country where there is constant anti-Jewish and anti-Zionist rhetoric in the public sphere, where Jews are threatened each and every day, and where the largest Jewish school in Canada, Chat, yesterday has to be evacuated because of a bomb threat that made no pretense to be a threat against Zionists, even though we all know that's merely a code word for you and for me. But the threat very clearly in this letter was to Jews. The reality for Jews, and frankly for other minorities, the Jafari Community Center of the Muslim community was evacuated the day before because of a bomb threat. The nature of what it is to live in this great country is changing. And I had the privilege of watching the Deputy Prime Minister, who spoke at the rally on October the 9th and vowed to stand with the Jewish community of Canada in this environment, responding to protesters dogging senior government officials by suggesting that those protesters should be respectful of the politicians. Really? It's online, on Global, you can see it. That's what she said, and you can see her, as much as I often respect what she says, you can see her measuring each word, trying to make sure that she doesn't seem to be criticizing anybody's freedom of expression. I'll say it again, it seems to be something I can't help but keep coming back to. Freedom of expression is a right. Freedom of expression without consequence is not a reality. People have a right to express themselves, and they have an absolute obligation to be responsible for the consequences of the words that they choose. I do, and you do, and so does everyone else. So enjoy their freedom of expression, but let's call out those who use their freedom of expression to incite against you and me, who use their freedom of expression to turn Canada into a place where children of minorities are afraid to go to school, who turn Canada into a place where instead of thinking of Faywood Elementary School as a place where early Temple Sinai had its religious school briefly, we think of it as a place where a boy with a kippah was swarmed in a bathroom for being Jewish. Why does that happen? It happens for many reasons, one of which is the unwillingness of those who speak in public to pick up a pitchfork and look underneath the expressions in our society and to see what they really mean. It is not time to limit freedom of expression in Canada, but it is time to demand that people take responsibility for those expressions and they be called out on using language that is not prayerful, that is not about freedom, but is in fact about the encouragement of hatred and the criticism of those who act while we countries in the West recognize the evil far away and do somewhere between precious little and nothing about it. What does it mean when people put up posters of people who are being held captive? We're happy to partner with Friends of Simon Wiesenthal, who'll be using our parking lot tomorrow as a staging area for volunteers who are going out, and be honest, they're not just putting up pictures of hostages, they are replacing those pictures, knowing that many of these will be torn down almost as soon as they are put up. But nevertheless, we put them up anyway. Why? Because that's prayer, because it's time for us to hold a pitchfork, not to threaten others, but to make sure that suffering has a face, to make sure that terrorism has a consequence that people can actually see, and to hold it in front of them and demand that they respond. How well will we do? I don't know. That's the prayer part of this. But this is a long battle, not a short one, and one that those who pretend to leadership positions deny their responsibility day in and day out, and not just here in Canada. This morning, the families of those held captive in Gaza completed a 5-day march to Jerusalem, a march in which they demand crazy things like, I don't know, the prime minister of the country being willing to look them in the eye and tell them what they want to know. Is that really asking too much? That's so basic. And yet, even what is basic is often denied by those who claim to be in responsible positions near and far. As they entered the gates of Jerusalem this morning, they sang a song familiar to us. They sang Lu Yehi. Kol shenivakesh Lu Yehi. Lu Yehi means may it be. Kol shenivakesh Lu Yehi. Everything that we desire, that we request, so may it be. And so as a conclusion for this moment this morning, we're going to sing that song with them, at least from here, reminding us that we have the obligation to do what prayer is really about, to feel the suffering and the pain of those of our brothers and sisters who are genuinely on the front lines, to feel the experience of those who are experiencing fear here in Canada because they're being allowed to do so, though the actions of the police remain incredible and something we are enormously grateful for. And we end with a song that is really a prayer. May we do everything that actually is within our power to contribute toward and motivate those with influence to create a better moment, a better world. And may the prayers, even the ones that may not seem about to come true, may they lead to the better days that are deserved and to reunions for each and every one of those over 240 families.